Most people think economic warfare starts with tariffs, sanctions, or angry speeches at international summits. In reality, it usually begins with paperwork, quiet regulations, a few signatures, a policy update buried under holiday headlines. And by the time anyone realizes what happened, the leverage has already shifted. That's exactly what's unfolding right now in the global silver market. And almost no one in the mainstream conversation is paying attention. While investors were ringing in the new year, arguing about AI stocks, Bitcoin ETFs, and whether the Fed is bluffing again, Beijing made a move that fundamentally altered the balance of power in one of the world's most critical industrial metals. No missiles, no press conference, just export controls. Effective January 1st, China flipped a switch, and silver stopped being just another commodity. It became a strategic asset. The implications of that change are enormous. Silver isn't a niche metal for coin collectors and conspiracy theorists. It's embedded in solar panels, EVs, military electronics, medical devices, data centers, and virtually every piece of advanced technology that modern economies rely on. If you care about energy transitions, national defense, or industrial resilience, you care about silver, whether you realize it or not. Here's what changed. Under China's new export framework, only large state-licensed companies are allowed to export silver. Not just any large company either. To qualify, a firm must produce at least 80 tons of silver annually, maintain a credit line north of $30 million, and receive explicit government approval. This isn't red tape for the sake of bureaucracy. It's a filter, and it's a very intentional one. Hundreds of small and mid-sized exporters were effectively shut out overnight. These weren't fly-by-night operations. Many had long-standing relationships with refiners, manufacturers, and industrial buyers across Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia. Suddenly, those supply chains were severed, not because of market forces, but because the rules changed. The Chinese government later released a list of exactly 44 companies approved to export silver under the new regime. 44, that's the gate. And behind that gate sits a metal that underpins entire industries. A state-affiliated media outlet quoted an industry insider who put it bluntly, "Silver has now been elevated to the same strategic category as rare earth elements." That comparison should make anyone with a memory longer than 5 years sit up straight. We've seen this movie before. Rare earths followed a similar path. First, quiet consolidation, then export controls, then price leverage, then geopolitical consequences. Back then, many Western policymakers dismissed it as overblown until they couldn't source critical inputs anymore. This time, the stakes are arguably higher. Rare earths are vital, but silver is ubiquitous. It's not just in cutting-edge tech, it's everywhere. And unlike oil, you can't easily substitute it at scale without sacrificing performance or efficiency. To be fair, China isn't the only country waking up to silver's strategic importance. The United States Geological Survey recently designated silver as a critical mineral. That designation actually matters. It influences federal investment, mine permitting, and long-term industrial planning. It's one reason you're seeing renewed interest in silver mining projects across North America. Governments don't update those lists casually. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Mining is only half the story. In many ways, it's the less important half. The real power lies in refining. And this is where China's position becomes impossible to ignore. China is not the world's largest silver miner, but it doesn't need to be. What it controls is the choke point between raw ore and usable metal. Between 60 and 70% of the world's refined silver supply passes through Chinese refineries. That's not a talking point. That's dominance. According to data from the London Bullion Market Association, China hosts 27 accredited silver refineries. Japan, which ranks second globally, has 13. The gap isn't marginal, it's structural. It reflects decades of deliberate industrial policy, capital investment, and long-term planning that most Western economies simply didn't prioritize. And the trade data reinforces the strategy. In the first 11 months of 2025, China exported roughly 4,600 tons of silver while importing only about 220 tons. Think about that imbalance. China brings in raw material, processes it domestically, and exports refined silver on its own terms. It's not accidental. That's textbook resource leverage. Alongside silver, China also imposed export controls on tungsten and antimony, both critical for defense and advanced manufacturing. This isn't a coincidence or a one-off experiment. Export controls are now a standard tool in Beijing's economic playbook. Analysts like Falamin have pointed out the pattern clearly. Control supply, protect domestic industry, and gain pricing power globally. It works, which is why it keeps getting used. One commentator, Charlie Garcia, summed it up with a bit of brutal honesty when he wrote that China weaponized silver while Americans were busy arguing about whether Bitcoin is real money. It's a sharp line, but it lands because there's truth in it. While Western markets obsessed over digital abstractions, China doubled down on physical infrastructure. Furnaces, electrolytic cells, chemical processing plants, not flashy, not viral, extremely effective. This is the part of the story most investors miss. The fortress isn't a warehouse full of bars, it's an ecosystem. Refining capacity takes years to build, billions to finance, and specialized expertise to operate. You don't spin it up because prices spike one quarter. China understood that early. Others didn't. Now that Fortress is operational and the gatekeeper is tightening access just enough to remind everyone who holds the keys. Not enough to cause immediate shortages, not enough to trigger panic headlines, just enough to shift negotiating power. So where does this leave the rest of the world? In a reactive position for now. Building new refining capacity outside China is possible, but it's slow, expensive, and politically messy. Environmental permitting alone can take a decade. Skilled labor isn't instantly available, and capital prefers certainty, not long timelines and regulatory risk. This doesn't mean silver is guaranteed to hit a specific price target. Markets are more complex than that, but it does mean volatility, strategic competition, and supply security are now front and center. The question isn't whether silver becomes more expensive. The question is who decides where it goes and at what cost. History suggests that when control over critical materials becomes visible, governments respond. Subsidies emerge, strategic stockpiles grow, alliances shift. None of that happens overnight, but it always starts after the quiet moves are already in place. And that's where we are today. The battle lines weren't drawn with tanks or treaties. They were drawn with licensing requirements and refinery capacity built years ago. Silver didn't suddenly become important. It always was. The difference is that now one country has acknowledged that reality and acted accordingly. The rest of the world is just beginning to catch up. There's a tendency to think that dominance in global markets is about being slightly better, slightly cheaper, or slightly faster than the competition. In this case, that framing completely misses the point. The distance between China and the rest of the world in silver refining isn't a competitive gap. It's a structural divide. No other country is even playing the same game. The United States doesn't come close. Canada doesn't. Mexico doesn't. Switzerland, despite its long-standing reputation in precious metals processing, simply doesn't have the physical infrastructure at anything resembling China's scale. This isn't about efficiency tweaks or marginal upgrades. The facilities, the throughput, the sheer volume of refined metal moving through Chinese plants are unmatched anywhere else on the planet. When a single nation controls well over 2/3 of global refining capacity for a material that modern industry cannot function without, the dynamic shifts. At that point, it's no longer a free market in the classical sense. Analysts refer to this as a single point of failure in the supply chain, but that phrase is almost too polite. A more accurate term is a single point of control. China doesn't just refine silver mined within its own borders. It imports enormous volumes of unrefined material from across the globe, processes it domestically, and then decides how and where the finished product moves. The trade data makes this strategy impossible to ignore. In the first 11 months of 2025, China imported roughly 220 tons of refined silver. During the same period, it exported about 4,600 tons. That's not a rounding error, that's a blueprint. Raw material flows in, value is added domestically, finished product flows out, but only under conditions that can be adjusted at will. This is where the January 1st export controls come into play. China didn't shut down silver exports. That would have been crude, loud, and politically costly. Instead, it inserted a checkpoint. Now, every ounce of refined silver leaving the country requires approval. Every exporter is vetted. Every transaction is visible. Every buyer is identifiable. Information, in this context, is leverage. China now knows exactly who depends on its silver, how much they need, and how urgently they need it. That's not market intelligence you can buy from a data provider. That's strategic awareness baked directly into the supply chain. Western manufacturers are starting to feel this exposure. A smartphone plant in California, a solar panel manufacturer in Germany, an electronics producer in South Korea. These companies have relied on Chinese refined silver for years, often without thinking much about it. It was reliable, available, and competitively priced, until it wasn't invisible anymore. Japan is often cited as the most realistic alternative for countries looking to reduce dependence on Chinese refining. And to be fair, Japanese facilities are world-class. High standards, consistent quality, strong regulatory oversight, and solid geopolitical alignment with Western economies. But realism matters here. Scaling Japanese capacity to meaningfully offset China would take years, not months. It would require billions in capital, long-term government coordination, and a level of urgency that hasn't yet translated into action. Building a large-scale silver refinery is not like opening a warehouse. Under ideal conditions, construction alone takes 3 to 5 years. Then come environmental permits, workforce training, quality certifications, and integration into global trading systems. None of these steps speed up just because the stakes are suddenly higher. Bureaucracy, unfortunately, doesn't run on adrenaline. The London Bullion Market Association's accreditation system underscores just how lopsided the situation is. LBMA approval is the gold standard for precious metals refineries. Without it, participation in global wholesale markets is severely limited. China has 27 LBMA-accredited silver refineries. Japan has 13. Everyone else trails far behind. This isn't just a numbers issue. It's the result of decades of industrial policy decisions. While much of the West leaned into financialization, services, and outsourcing, China invested in capacity. Not flashy consumer brands or speculative tech valuations, but furnaces, processing plants, and metallurgical expertise. Silver refining was never glamorous. It didn't attract headlines or venture capital. It was industrial, capital-intensive, and frankly boring, right up until it became strategically indispensable. One industry insider described China's position with unsettling clarity, noting that its massive refining capacity effectively makes the country the gatekeeper of the global silver supply. Gatekeeper is the key word. A gatekeeper doesn't need to slam the gate shut to exert control. They just need to decide who passes through, when, and under what conditions. China now has that authority, and it has shown it's willing to exercise it. If this feels familiar, it should. History may not repeat itself, but it has an uncanny habit of echoing at inconvenient moments. Anyone who paid attention to the rare earth market around 2010 is probably experiencing a strong sense of déjà vu right now. 15 years ago, China controlled roughly 97% of global rare earth production. These were obscure elements with names most people couldn't pronounce, let alone spell. But they were essential. Smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, missile guidance systems all depended on them completely. Beijing didn't ban rare earth exports outright. That would have been too obvious and too easy to challenge diplomatically. Instead, it introduced a web of licensing requirements, export quotas, environmental compliance rules, and inspection regimes. Each one sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a maze. One analyst memorably described it as death by 1,000 forms filed in triplicate. The result was devastatingly effective. Rare earth prices didn't just rise, they exploded, increasing by as much as 4,500%. Not because the materials disappeared, but because access was carefully, methodically constrained. Western manufacturers learned a harsh lesson. They couldn't build smartphones without Chinese approval. They couldn't produce advanced weapon systems without navigating Chinese bureaucracy. Supply chain managers discovered that their just-in-time models came with an unspoken dependency. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tanks or sanctions. It was quiet, relentless, and bureaucratic. By the time governments reacted, the market had already been reshaped. That same playbook is now being applied to silver. But this time, the implications are broader. Silver isn't confined to niche technologies. It's embedded everywhere. Solar panels, electronics, medical equipment, water purification systems, batteries, conductors, antimicrobial applications. Modern life runs on silver in ways most people never consider. And unlike rare earths, silver's properties are extraordinarily difficult to replace. It has the highest electrical conductivity of any element, the highest thermal conductivity. It's the most reflective metal known. These aren't marketing claims. They're fundamental characteristics of physics. You can't negotiate with the periodic table, and China understands that perfectly. Compounding the issue is the supply side of the equation. Since around 2016, global silver mine output has peaked and begun a gradual decline. Forecasts from groups like Metals Focus suggest that while silver prices may reach record highs over the next 5 years, mine supply growth will remain stubbornly limited. That sounds counterintuitive. Higher prices should mean more production. That's economics 101. But silver doesn't behave like a textbook commodity. More than half of global silver production comes as a byproduct of mining other metals, primarily copper, zinc, and lead. These mines aren't operated for silver. Silver is essentially a bonus recovered during processing. If silver prices triple, a copper mine doesn't suddenly ramp up production. The decision-making is driven by copper prices, not silver. The silver just comes along for the ride. This creates what economists call price inelasticity. Even dramatic increases in silver prices don't result in proportional increases in supply. Put all of this together, and the picture becomes clear. China controls the refining bottleneck. Demand for silver is structurally rising. Supply growth is constrained by geology and mining economics. And export controls have transformed a once invisible dependency into a strategic vulnerability. The fortress has already been built. The gates are staffed. And the rest of the world is only now realizing that it has been operating inside that structure all along. At some point, every market runs into a reality check. And silver is well past that point. The idea that higher prices will magically summon new supply sounds comforting, but it doesn't survive contact with geology, physics, or permitting agencies. The supply response for silver isn't just slow, it's muted, delayed, and fundamentally inadequate for the demand curve that's already locked in. Yes, roughly 28% of global silver production comes from primary silver mines, operations where management decisions are more directly influenced by silver prices rather than copper or zinc markets. In theory, that should help. In practice, those mines are fighting uphill on every front. Ore grades are declining steadily. New discoveries contain less silver per ton of rock than deposits found decades ago. That means miners have to dig deeper, move more material, process more volume, and burn more energy just to stand still. At the same time, costs are rising across the board. Labor isn't getting cheaper. Energy certainly isn't. Equipment costs have surged. Environmental compliance, permitting, community engagement, and regulatory oversight add layers of expense that didn't exist in prior mining cycles. Productivity gains can't keep up. Even well-run operations are seeing margins squeezed from both ends. And then there's the timeline, which is the part most investors underestimate. From the discovery of a promising silver deposit to the first commercially produced ounce, the average timeline runs between 10 and 20 years. A decade is the optimistic case. Exploration takes time. Drilling campaigns take years. Resource estimates, feasibility studies, environmental impact assessments, public consultations, infrastructure build-out, mine development, and processing plant construction all stack on top of one another. None of these steps happen quickly, and none of them happen cheaply. One analyst summed it up perfectly when he said the supply cavalry isn't coming. It's geologically stuck in traffic. Even if every mining company on the planet decided tomorrow to fast-track every viable silver deposit, meaningful new supply wouldn't reach the market until the mid-2030s at the earliest. This isn't a short-term imbalance. It's structural. The numbers confirm it. For 4 consecutive years, global silver demand has exceeded supply. In 2024 alone, the deficit reached nearly 149 million ounces. Over 4 years, the cumulative shortfall stands at about 680 million ounces, roughly equivalent to 10 months of global mine production. That metal didn't vanish. It was absorbed into solar panels, electronics, industrial applications, and long-term investment holdings. It's off the market. The Silver Institute projects another deficit in 2025. Some analysts believe it will be the 5th consecutive year. Others think it may be the 6th. Either way, the market is being drained systematically year after year. And just as that drain accelerates, China has positioned itself at the valve. This is where silver stops being an abstract commodity discussion and starts colliding with energy policy. The future of renewable energy has a vulnerability, and it's made of metal. Every solar panel installed across Europe, every renewable project announced in North America, every climate pledge backed by government mandates shares one non-negotiable input: silver. Silver isn't optional in solar technology, it's essential. Silver paste conducts electricity from photovoltaic cells with unmatched efficiency and reliability. Engineers have spent decades searching for cheaper alternatives, and to be fair, they found one. Copper can technically replace silver in solar cells. The physics works. Laboratory tests confirm it. On paper, problem solved. In the real world, not even close. Transitioning a single solar cell manufacturing facility from silver-based to copper-based production takes roughly 18 months. That's for one factory. There are approximately 300 such factories operating globally. Even under fantasy assumptions of unlimited capital, flawless execution, and zero regulatory friction, the maximum realistic conversion capacity is about 60 factories per year. Do the math. 4 years just to convert half the industry. And that assumes everything goes right. No delays, no technical setbacks, no supply chain hiccups, no financing issues, no geopolitical disruptions. In reality, it would take longer, much longer. Solar manufacturers know this. They're not ignorant of rising silver prices. They've watched prices climb throughout 2024 and 2025. They've absorbed price increases approaching 180%, and they're still buying silver. Not because they want to, because they have to. Production schedules don't wait 4 years. Customer contracts don't pause. Government renewable mandates don't come with footnotes that say, unless the factory is retooling. So manufacturers keep purchasing silver at whatever price clears the market. Analyst estimates suggest silver would need to reach around $134 per ounce before the solar sector experiences serious demand destruction. At that point, the financial pressure would force production halts and emergency conversion efforts. Some banking analysts believe that level isn't hypothetical. They believe it's approaching. And solar is only one piece of the puzzle. The defense sector is another, and it's deliberately opaque. Governments don't publish detailed material consumption data for weapon systems. Defense contractors aren't eager to disclose what goes into their hardware. But industry analysts agree on one thing. Silver consumption in defense applications is significant. Missile guidance systems rely on silver. Radar equipment uses it in circuitry. Secure communication systems depend on silver connectors. Surveillance and sensor technologies incorporate silver for performance and reliability. Every advanced military platform depends on a metal that China increasingly controls at the refining level. That's not speculation, that's strategic reality. Charlie Garcia captured the logic bluntly when he wrote that Beijing isn't restricting silver exports because it's worried about speculation. China is restricting exports because it needs the metal and has grasped something Washington hasn't fully internalized yet. The clean energy transition runs on metals, and whoever controls the metals controls the transition. It's worth reading twice because it cuts through a lot of comforting narratives. China's silver policy isn't happening in isolation. The same January 1st framework included export controls on tungsten and antimony, both essential for defense and advanced manufacturing. Tungsten is critical for armor-piercing munitions and high-temperature applications. Antimony is used in flame retardants, batteries, and specialized semiconductors. This isn't coincidence, it's coordination. Export controls have become a standard instrument in China's geopolitical toolkit. Rare earths followed this path. So did graphite. Gallium and germanium weren't far behind. The method is always the same. Don't impose an outright ban, that's too crude. Instead, add licensing requirements, quotas, approvals, inspections, compliance rules. Introduce uncertainty, make supply unreliable, force buyers into negotiations. And during those negotiations, interesting conversations tend to happen. Joint ventures, technology transfers, market access, political alignment. Leverage doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just sits behind a desk, stamping forms. Garcia described the likely future with uncomfortable precision. If you want to build the future of energy, you'll need to negotiate with Beijing. Maybe your shipment gets approved. Maybe it's delayed. Maybe you suddenly find yourself very open to Chinese partnerships. This is leverage disguised as bureaucracy. The implications don't stop at industrial policy. They spill into investment strategy and personal risk management. Physical silver carries no counterparty risk. There are no margin calls on metal sitting in a vault. No broker can freeze it. No digital system can erase it. It doesn't depend on promises or paper claims. It just exists quietly while export applications pile up in regulatory inboxes. That reality helps explain the surge in physical silver demand over the past year. Institutional buyers, family offices, and increasingly informed individuals are recognizing the shift. Silver isn't just a trade anymore, it's a strategic asset. In a resource conflict most people don't realize is underway. The United States has begun to respond. The designation of silver as a critical mineral is an acknowledgement of the issue. Domestic mining initiatives are being discussed. Permitting processes are under review. But recognition and resolution operate on very different timelines. China spent decades building refining capacity when silver was boring, cheap, and ignored. Western governments are now reacting while already dependent on Chinese supply. The rare earth episode taught a painful lesson. By the time the problem was fully understood, the market had already been restructured. Alternatives took years to develop. Supply chains couldn't be rebuilt overnight. The same pattern is unfolding again, but on a larger scale. The applications are broader, the dependencies run deeper, and the timeline for meaningful solutions is still measured in years, even as the pressure builds in months. China didn't shout, it didn't threaten. It simply clarified something the rest of the world is only beginning to grasp. Silver is no longer just a commodity, it's a strategic asset.